What's up, guys? You guys awake? What's up? Good. Man, you guys are really awake. I love this. So I have the distinct honor to serve alongside John Foutte in the junior guys small group, and it's awesome. I love that he was leader of the week this week. He's been doing an awesome job. So our other leader, Sean, isn't here this week, which I'm kind of bummed, but in a minute I'm going to say something that he wouldn't like, so I'll get there. But anyway, for those of you guys who are new, we're going through a series, a book called The Story, which is basically the Bible, taking all of the main themes of the Bible and putting them in novel form, all in chronological order. And right now we're in the middle of a series called Middle, which is all about following Jesus when we don't feel like it, right? So before we jump into that, I know a lot of you guys don't know me very well. I've been here since August, but it's kind of hard to connect with everybody on Sunday morning. So I want to tell you guys just a little bit about me so you understand who you're listening to, really. So for me, you know, I'm a junior guy, small group leader. By the way, what's up, guys? You know, that also doesn't mean that if you're not a junior guy, you can't talk to me. Just throwing that out there. But also, I'm from Florida originally, moved out here about 3 years ago. I've been a full-time musician, I've been a full-time youth pastor. Now I'm an admissions counselor at Vanguard. Woo! That's the part that Sean doesn't like because he's a Bible guy. So we have some good conversations about the rivalry there. But basically, you know, Vanguard University, hashtag best Christian university in the nation. Just throwing that out there. I know all you guys, the Bible guys. I love you guys. It's cool, but I'm a little biased. So if you want to know about Vanguard, then you can come talk to me, but that's a shameless plug for there. Anyway, so also, I love music, I love movies, and I love hockey. Florida Panthers will always be my heart and soul. I do love the Ducks. I love that they're my local team. I'm not a Kings fan. But if the Ducks are ever playing the Panthers, you know who I'm rooting for. I'm sorry. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me now. Let's rewind a little bit, though. So when I was growing up, you know, I grew up in a family that we went to church, but not because there was anything meaningful there, just what you're supposed to do on Sunday. I grew up with an alcoholic father, who is still an alcoholic, but he's functional. But, you know, so those of you guys who have alcoholics in your family, you understand what that means. My parents, they always fought, right? I basically don't remember my parents ever having a civil conversation. So that's how much they fought. It was all the time. It was on holidays. It was on birthdays. Everything. So I was also made fun of at school a lot, even in elementary school. I was the shortest kid in class. I'm older than Mike, but I'm shorter than him. So that's just part of my life. But I was the shortest kid in class, so I got made fun of for that. I also had ADHD, mild dyslexia, and a condition called exotropism, which basically means that the muscles behind your eyes are a little bit weak, and they make your eyes want to turn outward naturally. So basically, you couldn't see that, but it made my reading a lot slower than most students. So I always finished my work last, my tests last. So people made fun of me, calling me slow and stupid and mental and retard, and really scarring things as a kid. I remember in 4th grade, I contemplated suicide. Things that you wouldn't imagine a 4th grader would be dealing with, but I remember riding home from school going, maybe if I wasn't here, they'd be sorry. Maybe then they'd stop. Maybe then they'd see. But then I always kind of went through it in my head, like, who would care if I was gone? And I always came back to my mom, because when I was having a hard day at school, she'd come pick me up. I'd say, oh, I'm not feeling well. So the nurse would call my mom. My mom would come pick me up. She'd take me home, give me a bowl of Cheerios, sit me in front of the TV, and I'd feel loved, you know? So I'm a huge supporter of moms because of that. My mom basically was the person that allowed me to feel Jesus in those moments. So then, you know, step forward a couple years. 12 years old, I prayed the prayer to accept Jesus. Nothing changed because all I was concerned about was not going to hell. I was terrified of going to hell. So basically, I had fire insurance at that point. They said, pray this prayer, you won't go to hell. I said, yeah, okay, you know. But then 3 years later, when I was 15, I realized, like, I went to a youth rally with my youth group, and I realized that the creator of the universe, the all-powerful God who made everything, loved me so much that he sent his son to die a horrible, gruesome death just so that he could hang out with me for eternity. I said, I want to love that guy back. So that's when I actually gave my life to Jesus. and surrendered to him and started following him, my life changed. Not to say that my life became perfect, because at 18, the night before I left for college, my mom said, "Hey, I'm divorcing your dad." That broke me. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, you were older, so it didn't affect you as much." Age doesn't matter when it comes to divorce, and a lot of you guys know that. It broke me. I said, my parents always fight, but divorce is something that happens to other people, not us, So my whole world got rocked. I went to college the first couple of weeks, my whole world changed, because not only did my parents get divorced, so I didn't want to talk to them, but my girlfriend and I broke up over that summer. My guy best friend and I stopped talking. The band I was in, 3 closest guys in my life kicked me out, and so I was no longer friends with them. And the girl best friend that I had over the summer told me that I was supposed to be her husband. She felt like that was what God was telling her. And I said, okay, well, I got to pray about that too. So I started praying, and she started dating another guy. So I was like, well, that's my answer, So, but then all the people that were closest to me were gone. And for the first 10 months of my freshman year of college, I had nobody. Not my parents, not my best friends, not my band, not my girlfriend, nobody to turn to. In a time that everything is new and everything is kind of scary, and I had nowhere to turn but up. And looking back on it, I thank God so much for that time, because it was the most spiritually growing time of my entire life, because I had to go to Him with everything. And it was awesome. Now let's hit pause there and get into Esther, because that's what we're talking about this week, the book of Esther. Chapter 20 in the story. Esther is an awesome, awesome story. So I'll just kind of break it down real quick for you. We're in a season of the story where the Jews are now under an empire called Persia, right? King Xerxes is the king over Persia, and all of the Jews, Persia is huge now. It's taken over pretty much everything. And so King Xerxes and Queen Vashti are the rulers over Persia. And basically, King Xerxes throws a party. He says, hey, have Queen Vashti come see me. She refuses. So he goes, all right, get rid of her. Because that's kind of how they did things. King was all-powerful. And, if you didn't do what he says, you're gone. So then, the king looks for a new queen, finds Esther. She's the most beautiful, most awesome girl. He says, I want her to be the queen. So he puts a crown on her head, doesn't know she's a Jew, but we'll get back to that. So he makes her the new queen. And Mordecai, who's a guy who's basically Esther's older cousin, but Esther's parents died when she was younger, and so he adopted her and raised her as his own daughter, right? So he's kind of a father figure, but cousin. It's kind of different, but so he overhears 2 guys plotting to kill the king. So he tells Esther. Esther tells the king. Mordecai gets credit for saving the king's life, right? And then we move a little bit more forward from that. King Xerxes promotes a guy named Haman. Haman's a bad dude. He gets into some gnarly stuff in a little bit, but he basically promotes Haman and commands that everybody bow down to Haman every time Haman walks by. So Mordecai, being a Jew, being a guy that worships God and God alone, he won't bow to Haman. Just like we shouldn't bow to anything else, but he won't bow to Haman. And Haman gets mad every time this happens because he's right at the gate. He sits at the gate. Mordecai hangs out there. Every time he passes, he won't bow down. He's like, man, this guy isn't doing what he's supposed to do for me, right? So basically, Haman goes to the king and he says, there's this guy, he's a Jew, all the Jews, they're messed up. They got their own laws, their own rules, they'll do what they want. They aren't going to listen to you as king. They're not going to follow your laws because they got their own. We should just get rid of them. Just kill all of them. Somehow he convinces King Xerxes this is a good idea, so King Xerxes is like, okay, here's a law on this date, several months in the future, we'll just kill all the Jews, right? Sounds like, Nazi Germany, right? But that's just kind of what was happening. And so what a lot of times we don't see at this point in Esther's story is what's happening in the upper story. We've been talking a lot about the upper story and the lower story, right? And God's continually doing this thing in the upper story that we don't see in the lower story. The lower story is just pieces, right? So in the lower story, that's what's happening. But in the upper story, all of the Jews live in Persia. All of them. The Persian Empire has become huge. And so if this law actually takes place and all the Jews get annihilated, that's it. That's the end. right? So all of the promises that God gave to Abraham, all of the promises to work his saving work through Abraham's descendants, all that's over if the Jews actually get killed by this law. So not only that, but there's no fulfillment in Jesus, no gospel, no Christian church if this happens. So that's the weight. All of that is on the line at this point, right? So that's kind of the upper story portion of what's happening. So Esther is in a position, right? She's the queen, she's a Jew. They don't know she's a Jew. Mordecai goes to her, he says, dude, you got to do something. You're in a position to do something. You got to do something. And she says, okay, you don't understand. If I approach the king without being asked for, without being invited, he's going to kill me. Because you don't approach the king uninvited. You wait for him to invite you to come talk to him. She's like, he hasn't invited me. If I go to see him, he could just have me killed. And Mordecai says something awesome here. And in Esther chapter 4, verse 13 through 14, it says, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for all the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? And there's two really important things that happen right there. Not only does he demonstrate his faith, he says, you know what? God's going to save us anyway. God's going to deliver us. But whether or not he uses you to do it is up to you. Right? You can choose to do something, do what he's telling you to do, or you can back out and say, it's not my problem. He's going to deliver us anyway, but you'll end up going down for it. Right? The other piece is that he says something that's the pivotal point in the story, and we'll come back to it in a few minutes, but he says, who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Like, this may be the point of why you're queen in the first place. Right? So then it continues. She says, in verse 15 and 16, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Now she basically goes, okay, I get it. I need to do something. And if I die, I die, but I need to do it. I need to go. But she also says, I need to go with prayer. I mean, we need to take this to God. We need to go to him first. Pray for his direction, pray for his guidance, pray for his protection. And then I need to do it. And if I die, I die, but it's what I need to do. So, she goes to the king, and she says, she's like, here I am, can I talk to you? And he's like, you can live, what do you want? Right? And she's like, well, if it's okay with you, I just want you and Haman to come to a banquet that I'm going to put on. A big feast. He's like, all right. So they go to this big feast. And at the feast, he goes, what is your request? What do you want? And she's like, if it's okay with you, just you and Haman come to another feast. Right? At this point, he's probably like, okay, I love to eat, but come on, And so, the first feast happens, and she's like, come back for another one. And that's the next day. But that night, as they're going home, basically, Haman sees Mordecai on the way home. And he doesn't bow again. Haman gets angry, and he says, this is enough. Like, this guy can't stand me. He won't bow to me. Right? Haman decides that he needs to kill Mordecai. So, have any of you guys seen Frozen? Good. I was there too. It was awesome. My favorite line of the whole movie, right? Olaf. He's talking. Oh, look, I've been impaled. My favorite line. I say it all the time. Right, Elijah? So basically, being impaled is something they did, They put people on poles, And it was gnarly. But this guy sets up a 75-foot pole, much bigger than they normally did, because he wanted it to be a public spectacle that Mordecai got impaled. right? So he sets up this 75-foot pole, and he's like, in the morning, I'm going to go to King Xerxes, and I'm going to say, hey, we need to kill this guy, let's do it, right? And the pole's already set up. So, at the same time, the king goes home, he can't sleep, right? He's basically, so restless, he's like, you know what? I need something to put me to sleep. Give me the Royal Chronicles, which is the book of all the stuff that's happened under his reign. It sounds like a boring thing, so maybe it'll help him sleep, right? So they see in the book, it's written that, Mordecai discovered this plot to kill the king, and he saved the king's life. And so the king goes, well, what's been done for this guy, right? What did we do for him since he saved my life and all? And they're like, nothing. We never did anything for him. And he says, who's in the court right now? And Haman had just come in, and he was coming to talk to the king about killing Mordecai. And he says, they're like, Haman's in the court right now. So he's like, Haman, what should be done for the man that the king wants to honor? And Haman, being the selfish idiot that he is, he's like, well, who could the king want to honor other than me, right? So he's like, okay, let me draw up a picture of what you should do for the guy that you want to honor. So in Esther chapter 6, verse 7, so he answered the king, for the man that the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe, and the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, one with the royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse, he robed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man who the king delights to honor. Can you imagine that? Like, there's this guy you hate, you want to have him killed, and you're like, hey king, and the king's like, what should I do for the guy I want to honor? And you're like, oh, it's me, right? So do this, and go do that for the guy you hate. Can you imagine that? Like, right? Mind blown. And so, Haman goes home, obviously pretty upset after that. And he goes to the banquet. This is obviously the next day. This all happened kind of in the morning. So they go to the banquet. And this is what happens next in Esther chapter 7. Then Queen Esther answered. This is after the king has basically sat down at the banquet. And he says, all right, what do you want? What's your request, right? We've been waiting so long. We've been eating, right? What do you want? She answers this. If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man that has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. He got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out to the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind and begged Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching to the height of 50 cubits, or 75 feet, stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Pretty gnarly, huh? So, after that, they kill Haman, obviously. King gives Haman's property to Esther. He brings Mordecai into the court, gives him a robe and a ring, and basically everything starts getting better. Esther goes, okay, we've got rid of Haman, but my people are still going to be killed by this law, right? You got to do something. He says, well, I mean, anything the king has written that can't be revoked. So write a new law. Here, write it in my name. Do whatever you want to do. So they write a new law that basically now the Jews can defend themselves against their enemies. And when that date comes, where all of a sudden these two laws are put into place, instead of the Jews getting destroyed, the Jews actually destroy all their enemies. and it takes a whole different turn. Because God, all the time, is working in this upper story. Right? And so, even things like the fact that he couldn't sleep, God was in that. The fact that he wanted to have the Chronicles read to him, he was in that. And so, as we look at Esther's position, a lot of us deal with stress. A lot of us deal with stress from home, from friends, from school, from all different angles. But Esther was in a position most likely more stressful than any of us have or ever will deal with. Right? Approach the king uninvited, you're dead. Say something the king doesn't like, you're dead. The fate of an entire nation, her whole race of people, was on her shoulders. Talk about stress, right? So she could have complained. She could have said, this is not my problem. I'm the queen. I'm safe, right? She could have questioned God. Why me? Why would you allow this to happen, God? But back to that pivotal moment where Mordecai said, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. God placed her there for a reason, right? A lot of times God allows things to happen, or he allows us to go through certain things, because he sees a bigger picture than we're able to see. He knows what he's doing in the upper story, while at the time all we can see is the lower story. Two verses come to my mind when I think about that kind of stuff. One is Jeremiah 29:11. A lot of you guys know this one. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." And James 1:2-4. "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work in you, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." So when I think about all of that, I look at Esther, I realize that a lot of the junk that happened in my life, that I talked about earlier, he had a purpose in me. He had a purpose for allowing me to go through those things. Having an alcoholic father, he didn't teach me through my dad how to be a good dad when I grew up. But he taught me a lot about what not to do. Right? He taught me a lot about how I don't want to do. Having fighting parents taught me a lot about the fact that I don't want to argue and yell and scream with my girlfriend or in the future my spouse. I don't want that to be our relationship. And I want to be intentional about not letting that be what is. Being made fun of at school for being short or having learning disabilities, it gave me a heart for people who are marginalized. It gave me a heart for people who have those kinds of struggles and aren't the most popular kid in the class. But it really helped me to really identify with those students and those people that have those things going on in their life. So I can say, hey, I've been there. And being in a place of having no friends and contemplating suicide at such a young age, it gave me a heart for people that are hurting. God allowed me to go through that, to develop in me a passion and a compassion for people that are in a really low place, for people that are struggling with depression, for people that are struggling with really dark times. Being able to walk alongside them in those moments. The way that somebody who hasn't been there just can't do, and that's okay. God gives each of us a different purpose and a different way to reach people for his kingdom, but that's the way that he developed me to be able to walk alongside those students and those people. Parents divorcing at 18, the last thing a person going through a parental divorce wants to hear from a person with parents who are happily married is, I understand. It's okay that you don't understand, but don't pretend to, right? That's the last thing somebody wants to hear is, I understand, from somebody who clearly doesn't. And you can be there for your friends in that and say, I don't understand, but I love you, I'm here for you, I'm walking alongside you, and that's great. But to be able to have the opportunity to say, hey, I've been there, I feel that, and I understand what you're going through, it can be really powerful, The fallout at 18, where everybody that was close to me was gone, taught me that God is my number one and can always be my number one. And not just when things are down, but when things are up. And that I always need to go to him first because he is the best person to go to, hands down. So all of that stuff worked together to create who he's made me today. I wouldn't trade any of it for anything different. So the upper story was that he knew that he wanted me in youth ministry long term. I didn't know that when I was younger. And the role that he wanted me to play was a role of being able to identify and empathize with students struggling with a variety of different things. And I'll tell you one thing, at the times when I was going through something really hard, but was able to remember those verses and remind myself that God has purpose in even this thing, even this really hard thing. And he's going to use it down the road. It definitely helped me to get through those things, trusting that he knew what he was doing in the other story. And the thing is, everyone's hard stuff looks different, right? So for some, it's broken family stuff. For some, it's something traumatic that happened. For some, it's something that's seemingly less severe, like school, right? But no matter the apparent level of severity, hard is hard, you know? And each person's hard takes on a different look. To you, my hard stuff might not seem that hard. To me, your hard stuff might not seem that hard. But for each person, their hard stuff is legitimately hard, whether it makes sense to somebody else or not. You know? So while you might go, okay, like my friend died, that's obviously hard. And you're only struggling with school. That's not hard. That's not true. School can be legitimately hard for somebody who's struggling with that. You know? It can have the same weight of these huge expectations that are put on you, and these huge demands that are put on you, and just the weight of all that can be super, super hard. So for each person, it looks different. So I want to take a minute and look at how one student describes her hard stuff. There's a student in here, Cambria. So we're going to take a look at how she describes hard. Maybe.
Hi, my name is Cambria. I'm a sophomore at Troy High School. I like to travel a lot. I like going new places and visiting new places and making friends. I really like making friends. I like being social and talking to people. I think I'm very outgoing, definitely more of an extrovert than an introvert. I grew up in a Christian home, and so I've been a Christian since first grade. It was Easter season in first grade, and because I had grown up in a Christian home, it wasn't a problem to me to say, yes, Jesus is real, Jesus died to save my sin because we've all sinned, and that was that. And I prayed the prayer in first grade and became a Christian. I am what they call an Eastside fetus. So forever that I remember. I remember Sunday school, lots of good memories from Sunday school, lots of good Bible time, lots of fun things that we did, and I remember junior high very well, and now that I'm in high school, of course, I remember that. My life is consumed with school. Unlike a lot of other people, it's hard for me to say that. It's hard for me to say that the reason why I don't seek God constantly is because of school. Because there's so many other people, I have friends, I have classmates, that are going through so much worse stuff that it's hard for me to be, I feel like I'm being selfish when I say all my problems are school. And it's very hard for me to identify that and say, yeah, but that's them and this is me. And my problem right here, right now, is school. And just this year, I'm a sophomore, freshman year was a culture shock. Not only was it an academic challenge, it was a culture shock. I had gone to a private Christian school for 8 years, then I went to a small public school for 3, and then I went to a huge high school. And it was a culture shock. There was lots of profanity. There were lots of things that I had never seen or heard of before. And that's not to say I lived a sheltered life, which I probably did. It wasn't a part of my life. It didn't need to be. And it's not now. That's not a part of my life, but it's still there and it's hard for me to ignore.
2 Chronicles 15:7. But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded.
If you're in the middle of school stresses, you have 2 choices. 1, to turn away from God and try to solve the problem by yourself, or 2, to turn to God and know that He will make your path straight.
So, the point is this. A lot of times we encounter stresses in life, right? Friends, home, school, we find ourselves asking why. Why this? Why that? Why is my home situation the way it is? Why are my friends acting that way? Why are people treating me like that? Why aren't I better in this class? Why am I being crushed by everyone's expectations? Why are things not the way that they should be? Why am I going through this thing that seems more painful and more heavy than I can bear? Here's the thing. A lot of times we ask, why, God? Why? And we should be asking, God, what are you doing through this? Are you doing something that you want to use me for? Are you trying to teach me something? Are you trying to grow and develop me in some way for your plan down the road? What are you doing through this? I want you guys to stand up with me. I want to challenge you guys this week. Something that I really want you guys to think about this as you go through this week. Okay? When you find yourself in a situation this week that really makes you want to cry out, why, God? Why is this happening? I want you to stop. Take a step back. Try to see God in what's happening. Try to see what He might be doing in the midst of that. And ask Him to show you what He wants for you in it. Not why are you letting this happen, but what are you trying to do? And what do you want from me? What do you have for me in this? I want to pray for you guys, but before I do, I want us to all put our arms around the people next to us. Because here's the thing. We're a family here. Right? Right? Yeah. So these are your brothers and sisters here. Okay? No matter what hard looks like, the person's heart next to you may look different than your heart or the person on your other side. But no matter what your heart looks like, we're in this together. Here to walk alongside each other, love on each other, encourage each other, walk with each other. So do that. Look for God in those situations this week that make you want to ask why, but ask what instead. And be there for each other. Let's pray. God, I just thank you so much for every person in this room. For every person that you intentionally brought here this morning. Lord, I pray that you would walk with us throughout the week. Lord, help us to see the moments that you're trying to do something within our lives and our situation. Allow us to see you. Not just to see the mess and the hard stuff, but to see you through that. God, I pray that you would help us to have your perspective. That you would teach us to see things from your angle. And that you would show us you this week in a new way. a way that we haven't seen